Just starting solids or a few months in, these cottage cheese chips can be adapted for baby, and they help moms prevent the silent bone loss that often sneaks up after birth. This recipe is a bone-building powerhouse because it can help prevent fractures and support lifelong strength for all ages. For moms, women begin to lose bone in their mid-30s. For babies who start to eat common food allergens, such as cottage cheese, which is also good for their bones, around 6 months old, may develop fewer allergies to these foods later in life. Welcome! Thanks for joining us on One Meal Fits All for Busy Moms. Is baby getting enough nutrient-dense foods to support healthy bone development? Cottage cheese is rich in protein and bone-building minerals to support their most rapid, biggest growth during their first year of life. My name is Angel, and I've been a registered dietitian since 2012. All the information I share here today is for general information purposes. When it comes to making cottage cheese for babies, I want you to know that cottage cheese, while it's not iron rich, it is extremely great for bone building because it's rich in calcium and phosphorus and protein, which are all essential nutrients to develop strong and healthy bones. But how are we going to modify this recipe so that it's baby appropriate in terms of texture and in terms of safety? Because cow's milk protein is a common food allergen. So we want to be careful if we're introducing it for the first time. When it comes to serving cottage cheese for the first time to baby, you can actually serve it just as is. And even though it looks really lumpy, it's okay because babies don't need to have teeth to have something that's lumpy in texture. They can use their gums and mash it. For those of you who are a little bit worried about the bigger lumps, you can of course use a fork to mash it up a little bit. So I guess what I'm saying is you can either serve it exactly as is, or you can choose to use the fork to mash it to get rid of those really big lumps. And some people might choose to put the cottage cheese through a blender as well, though that's not really necessary to have a puree consistency. So this is as much as you can modify it. And it's nice and moist. And some parents who feel more comfortable with spoon feeding, you can actually just feed the child with a spoon. And I think this is what I would recommend if you're doing it for the very first time, is you want to use a baby spoon and you fill it to about a quarter full. So a quarter baby spoonful, and you put it directly into baby's mouth. And what I mean by that is you would just offer it to the baby, see that baby's interested in it, and then if the baby opens its mouth, looks at it, and kind of gestures for it, then you know that the readiness sign is there. You then put this into their mouth and you wait. You wait for about 10 to 15 minutes to see if an allergic reaction develops. And if there's no reaction in 10 to 15 minutes, then you can go ahead and offer some more. Now, that would be the first successful exposure where no allergic reaction happens. And thereafter, you would then continue to offer foods with cow's milk protein regularly. So it could be 2 to 3 times a week, so that tolerance to this particular food protein is maintained. And so there's a key phrase that you might want to learn. It's that you introduce it early and then you provide it often. Early and often. But you would only start solids once baby is developmentally ready. So those readiness signs and cues are essential before you start any kind of solid food. All right. Now, for some parents who prefer to offer their baby a bit more of an opportunity to self-feed, there's a couple options. For parents who don't mind a bit of a mess, you can actually just put the cottage cheese directly onto the baby's tray table and let them grab at it with their hands themselves. But really young kiddos that are just 6 months old or so, they're not really going to be able to manage that because they haven't mastered the pincer grasp, which is where they bring their thumb and their index finger together to grab foods. But if your child is closer to 9 months old, then they may be able to pick up these little lumps of cottage cheese in their fingers. However, for babies even 6 months old, once they've established tolerance and you've given that first spoonful where they didn't have a reaction, then you can actually preload a spoon with, at this point, however much amount, and pick a shorter spoon so that baby can grab that preloaded spoon and then bring it to their mouth by themselves. And it's essential that you pick a spoon with a shorter handle because it's really difficult for a tiny baby to hold a long handle, rigid spoon like this and just kind of like bring it to their mouth. It's a very awkward angle for them. So just be mindful of that. Like the long spoons are better for you to spoon feed. The shorter ones are better for baby to self feed. Okay, so in terms of for baby, like we already established that cottage cheese is not an iron-rich food, but it is a common allergen. So now you know that for first exposure, that's what you would do the first time. And this is how you would modify the texture. There's not too much going on, and it's a pretty safe option to try out. But let me just set this aside. What about for moms? Well, for moms, most moms don't realize that they start losing bone mass in their 30s. And so it's really important to recognize that this cottage cheese chips recipe is important not only for the health of the mom to prevent osteoporosis and bone fractures, but rather it's also important for kids and their healthy development as well. So how would we prepare this cottage cheese chips recipe for moms? It couldn't be simpler. So let me show you. So cottage cheese is a very moist product, and it actually seeps liquid. And what we want to do is drain out the liquid so that you have a drier product, because this is going to go into the oven. So we're going to put it through a fine mesh sieve in a bowl. If you have cheesecloth, you can use that as well. And I have about 1 cup of cottage cheese in here. It might take 5 minutes or a bit longer for all of the liquid to seep out or to become a bit drier. You can speed up the process a little bit by working the cottage cheese and pressing it down a little bit. But often you can just do this while you're preheating the oven, or picking out the seasonings that you want to pair with these cottage cheese chips. It's really just a very simple recipe. For moms, it's essential that we make sure that mom has healthy bones as well. The peak bone building mass phase is over after kind of the early 20s. And so most moms are just trying to get enough of the daily calcium intake. And for women who are adults, pregnant, or breastfeeding, the amount of calcium that you need daily is about 1,000 milligrams a day. Dairy is a really rich source of calcium, and it also contains phosphorus, and cottage cheese contains loads of protein. It's got about 14 grams of protein in half a cup, and so that's a substantial amount that can help protect our bones as we age. Because as we know, women later in life, post-menopause, we actually are at a higher risk of osteoporosis. So before that happens, we want to make sure we have a habit of getting enough calcium every day. Calcium, phosphorus, protein, you get the gist. Lots of nutrient-dense foods. So as we kind of let the cottage cheese drain a little bit, I want to show you that for this recipe, you can actually use any seasoning that you want to flavor these chips. I happen to have these laying around at home that I thought would be fun. So this is, and they're all from Trader Joe's. So this is a Japanese seasoning to give more of a savory flavor. There's this Green Goddess kind of seasoning blend. There's a pizza seasoning. And then there's also the ever all-time favorite, everything bagel seasoning. That would be really good. If you wanted a sweet option, you could actually also put some cinnamon sugar on top as well. Now, what you want to do is you've already preheated the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. You want to line a baking sheet with either a silicone mat, or you can use parchment paper. Essentially just something so that the cottage cheese doesn't stick without you adding yet another ingredient. So I'm not even going to spray this mat with cooking spray or anything like that. It's just plain and basic. So what you're going to do is, you can see that a lot of liquid actually has drained out of the cottage cheese, even in the few minutes that we've been chatting. All right, so I think I'm gonna start this process, and I'll keep draining from the bowl as we do this. I've discovered that 1 cup of cottage cheese makes about 12 chips, depending on how big you make them and how far you spread them out. But one key mistake that I made last time was I made some thicker than others. And so the thicker ones became more on the chewy side, whereas the thinner ones became more crispy, which is what we're really going for. This is going to be going into the oven for 20 to 25 minutes. I find for my oven, it takes more like 25 minutes. But for yours, if your oven tends to run hot, then maybe you want to check it at 20 minutes. Essentially, you're just waiting for the edges to become crispy golden brown. Can you imagine yourself making this? It's a really simple recipe, and you can probably set this and forget it because it does bake for so long. As a working mom, if I was short on time, but I wanted to make a fun little snack that's rich in protein, I probably could just get this ready, put it in the oven, and then spend the baking time doing something else, whether that's the dishes or the laundry or something else. For those of you who are already struggling to meet your calcium goal of the 1,000 milligrams per day, I encourage you to try cottage cheese, to try other cow's milk dairy protein, because it's quite calcium dense. But if you can't tolerate cow's milk protein, or maybe you have lactose intolerance, then you have a couple options. You can try plant-based milks. Just make sure that they're calcium fortified. And if they're fortified to the degree of cow's milk, then 1 cup of plant-based milk should contain 300 milligrams of calcium. And so drinking 1 cup of that could bring you a third of the way to your calcium target and protecting your bones that way. But if you're not a huge fan of plant milk, there's also other plant sources of calcium, such as almonds or dark leafy greens or calcium set tofu that you can consider as well as alternatives. So it's about a 1/4 inch thick each, and the curds should touch each other so that it stays together during the baking process. If you wanted plain chips, this would just go right into the oven just like that. But right now we're gonna have some fun. I have 4 rows and 4 seasonings. So there are, like, you could, if you only wanted 1 flavor, you could just pre-mix this into the cottage cheese beforehand, but because I like to make it with multiple flavors, then you can just sprinkle it on top. It will bake and then become quite thin. So it's actually quite flavorful even if you're just sprinkling it on top. So there goes the pizza one. So for moms out there, maybe you'll like something like a pizza seasoning or like a ketchup dry powder seasoning. I think there's a myth that healthy snacks take a lot of time and effort, but as you can see, that barely took any time at all. So we have 4 different flavors, 12 chips in total, and now it's gonna go into the oven for 20 to 25 minutes. And I'll put it in right now. I'm gonna put it into the middle rack. And I'll keep the light on so that I make sure they don't burn. There we go. I'm just gonna set the timer. I will set it for 20 minutes so I can check it. So we'll be right back. Okay, so it's been 25 minutes. Let's see. Oh, there's one that looks a little bit burnt. Ooh, okay. So you can tell that despite my best efforts to make it even, some are crispier than the others, and then some that are thicker are a little bit less. But as you let this cool on the sheet here, it's actually gonna get harder and crispier. But because I kind of want to show you how to remove it off the silicone mat, I'm gonna just do that right now with you. I'm gonna go with this one. So it's a silicone mat, so it should just lift if we give it some time. And just use a spatula that works well for you, and you would just do your best to lift it. I'm a bit too impatient. If you do let it sit, it will be easier to lift up. But yeah, essentially that's what that would look like. And then the chewier one, like this one, it's really quite soft, so I think I'm better off letting that cool on the pan where there's residual heat. Now, if this is what happens to you as well, don't fret, the flavor's still there. And if you want to put it back in the oven and make it crispier again, by all means, you can. If you're fine with this chewier texture, you can enjoy them nice and warm while the cheese is still on the soft side. So this is how we make cottage cheese chips. It's simple, tasty, and healthy for moms and kids, modified for babies. All right, so earlier I wanted to show you how to make this into a more complete meal, because of course you may not want to have just cottage cheese chips on its own for yourself or your kids. So this is what I would do to make it more complete. So this is the adult plate, and for adults, we can serve it with some whole fruit. So this would be like a nice little snack, and you've got the protein here, and then you've got the carbohydrate here. That's wonderful as a snack. But what about, and this is fine for older kids as well, but what about for the younger kiddos? Well, for your littler ones, like we've got the more mashed up kind of cottage cheese, and then there's a more lumpy straight out of the container cottage cheese, which is, this would be more appropriate for 6 months, and this would be more appropriate for 9 months. But how would we offer fruit that's following that same general age category as well? Well, for the little one, who's only around 6 months old, we may feel comfortable giving more of a fruit sauce. So this is just applesauce that's unsweetened. And we would offer the cottage cheese a little bit more mashed up with a fork with a fruit sauce, like that. And then for an older child, around the 9-month mark, who has the developed pincer grasp where the index and the thumb go together, we can offer the fruit that we would serve the older kids and the adults, but we can cut it up so it's about the size of a finger knuckle. So it would be these smaller pieces that we can put. One that they can use their little hands. Just make sure it's nice and soft as well. One way you can check if it's soft enough is if you can pinch it in your hand like that, and it kind of just mushes. Like imagine that your fingers are the baby's gums, and if you could mush it like that, then they can mush it. But sometimes like melon, especially like if it's a bit too hard, that may not be okay. And finally, if you're serving a round fruit is considered a choking hazard, so you can't offer it like this. You have to go lengthwise and cut it. Sometimes with these really big grapes, cutting it into these lengthwise quarters may not be enough even, and you may want to do an additional cut until it's more like this size. And again, doing the pinch test, you can totally break that up. So this is how one meal fits all for moms and older kids, 9 months old and 6 month old or so babies. I hope you liked this episode. If you did, please feel free to watch another one, share with the mom you love, or do both. One step at a time, Mama. You got this.